Yotam, let me start with you. What has been the experience of ordinary Israelis in all of this? It must have been a terrifying experience last night, seeing the news and knowing that these drones were on their way. But of course, Israel's defence systems, in concert with many other countries, managed to stop the vast majority of them.
Yeah, I think if you weren't running for shelter yesterday, you were glued to the television, watching everything that came from the news, but also from the IDF, because it was a very serious escalation. When you hear the IDF spokesperson saying ballistic missiles have been fired at Israel, it sends a shiver down your spine, really. It's not an everyday thing at all, far from. In fact, it's the first time that Iran is attacking Israel directly. So I think a lot of people were nervous, and rightly so. But it turned out that Israel's military, its missile defense system was much more successful, I think, than most people would have even hoped for. 99% is an incredible rate. So this is why people woke up this morning, I think, feeling more positive and perhaps even emboldened, especially the military. You can tell that they feel like they have the upper hand now when it comes to the conflict between Israel and Iran.
Do you feel there's more unity in Israel now than there was yesterday?
I would say usually when Israel is under attack, people rally behind the flag, people try to stay united. They did so in the first couple of weeks of the war, months even of the war with Hamas. And when you're facing such a severe threat from Iran, ballistic missiles fired all over the country, of course, people unite. But again, we can't forget that there is a huge division inside Israel when it comes to who should govern Israel. Many people who are against Prime Minister Netanyahu, many people who would like to see him go, and that those demonstrations won't go anywhere. But for now, I think it's fair to say that people are rallying behind the military and to some extent also the government.
Jonathan Conricious, what is your take on what has happened in the last 24 hours?
Yes, hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I think it's a watershed moment in the Middle East. Iran came out of the shadows for the first time. Iran has been attacking Israel indirectly for decades, and this is the first time that they actually muster the courage and attack Israel directly with quite a significant attack on a military scale. I would call it cautiously, it doesn't sound very cautious, but I would call it a belly flop. Their attack was not successful. Israeli defenses were very, very successful. And now Israel has the ability to make smart decisions based on cold, strategic, and military calculations, not rash decisions based on damage or casualties in Israel. Usually those decisions are never really good. And what Israel now needs to do is to decide, okay, what does Israel want to achieve with the attack here, and what is our strategy vis-a-vis Iran? The reality on the ground around Israel is that there are dozens of Iranian proxies that Iran has funded and armed around our borders, eager to kill Israelis. And there are many ways to make it more difficult for Iran to continue to do that. And I think Iran has presented Israel with an opportunity to engage and to limit the spread of instability, violence, and terror in the Middle East, all of them sourced from Iran.
Susan Chelmsford has been in touch, and she correctly says that we should remember that the Iranian attack on Israel is a response to the Israeli attack on the Iranian consulate in Syria. Can you just, Jonathan, just take us back a little bit and give us the context of all of this? And actually, perhaps you could expand on that fascinating point you mentioned there about the proxies previously. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, these Iranian proxies being used previously, but now Iran itself for the first time.
Yeah, you know, I listen to lots of media reports and statements by politicians, and whoever feels the very strong urge to emphasize what type of building certain Iranian terrorists in uniform were in, for me, that labels a person as someone who is very desperately trying to blame Israel for defending itself. Let me be clear. The building in Damascus was not a consulary building, and it was not a diplomatic building. It was a building adjacent to the Iranian consulary, and as such, fair target. And most importantly, the people inside were very bad people who were busy planning and executing attacks against Israeli civilians and against the Israeli military. So let's lay that to rest. And all of those people who are very concerned about real estate and where a certain militant or combatant is attacked, I suggest we focus on the real matter here. Iran is an aggressor in the Middle East. They fund and arm and equip terror organizations against Israel, and all of the atrocities of October the 7th, the Hamas killing of Israeli civilians, thousands of rockets that have been fired at Israel from Gaza and from Lebanon, would not have been fired had it not been for Iranian money and Iranian weapons being provided to these organizations. And that, I think, is really the focus of it. And, you know, at the run-up to this Iranian attack, people were asking, okay, what will Iran do? And I said, well, if they choose to do more of the same, to use one of their proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, or Syrian proxies to attack Israel, that wouldn't really be very spectacular. Obviously, they chose to attack from Iranian soil for the first time, and now they bring Iranian soil into Israeli crosshairs. And I can assure you that when Israel decides what it wants to do and when it will deliver a retaliatory blow, I do not think that it will be a tremendous failure like the Iranian attack was. And I think that Israel will take its time, make calculations, ask and consult with its regional partners, I think with the UK as well, but mostly with the US, and think of the best way to bring about more stability in the Middle East, because Iran is unchecked, has been able to spread violence and instability for far too long. Israeli civilians have paid in their lives for this, and that needs to change.
Let me ask you, Jonathan, actually, about the fact that the Israeli military have said that 99% of these projectiles, of these missiles, have been intercepted, which is a tremendous achievement. Is there something of, I don't mean to be too cynical about this, but is there something that this was kind of performative by Iran to simply say, look, I mean, the Iranians must have known that a lot of these missiles would have been intercepted by the Israeli systems, by their allies. They would have known jets would have been scrambled from other countries as well. How much of this was actually an attack to kill people? And I don't minimize that for a second. I don't minimize the fact that there is a young girl who has been injured here. But Iran must have known that a lot of these would be intercepted, that the Israeli defense mechanisms and systems were going to intercept them, Jonathan.
You know, I'm not entirely sure that they must have known, because maybe they start to believe their own propaganda. Maybe they believe that Israel is weak. Maybe they believe that they can overcome our defenses. I don't know. There's a high level of rationality in Iran, but then it's also a fundamentalist, crazy religious regime. So maybe they start to believe their own propaganda, and they thought that they could do a repeat of their attack on Saudi oil facilities a few years ago, 5 years ago, which was very successful. Maybe they thought that they could do the same thing against Israel. I don't know really what they thought, but I don't think that firing almost 300 drones and missiles is something of a, you know, just to say that you did it, and not really a very serious attack intended on killing military and probably civilians. If they wanted to just say, okay, now we fired and let's move on, they could have fired from Syria, they could have fired 10 or 15 drones and missiles. That would have been a scope of something, you know, more local, just to say that let's get on with it, and now we have revenge. But to fire 300 from Iranian soil towards Israeli soil, that is a much bigger thing.
Yes.
I myself am also positively surprised by the qualitative response here by Israel and by the success. And I think that the Iranians didn't anticipate that we would be so successful in intercepting.
Yotam, perhaps you could paint a picture of what happens next. We know that the UN Security Council is being assembled at Israel's request, actually, later today. We also know that Biden has cancelled the trip. He's staying in the White House. We know that the War Cabinet has met in Israel overnight. But just tell us kind of what happens next practically.
So around 3:30 local time, the Security Cabinet is scheduled to meet and to discuss further what to do now, which kind of response Israel will launch. But of course, they have to coordinate closely with the United States. And I believe that Israel will take its time to find the right target and to do it in their time, because Israel, of course, is also not interested in a full-fledged war right now. I think most people know that. But again, in the Middle East, if you want your enemy to know that you're serious, you need to back up your words with action. So that's what Israel is going to do. And they're probably going to target military infrastructure. And like Jonathan said, I also believe they'll be more successful because their military is better. But it will be very interesting to see how the United States is going to react to this. Will they participate in it? Will they give their official backing? Will they keep mum? What will they do? I think one last thing I think is very important to mention is that Jordan, and we haven't really talked about that, but Jordan coordinated with Israel and the United States overnight. Jordan has been extremely critical of Israel during the entire 6-month war with Hamas. But when push comes to shove, when a country like Iran is going rogue and firing ballistic missiles over its territory and drones, it's doing what it can to protect itself, but also to help Israel, which is very interesting, I think.
Yeah, it is. Maybe perhaps Jonathan could give us his thoughts on Jordan and Saudi Arabia in all of this. What are your thoughts around their role, even a minimal one, within this?
Yeah, I think Yotam makes a very good point, and that is one of the most important spaces to watch. Washington, Jerusalem, as always, an interesting axis to analyze and understand, but really the local Middle Eastern axis, Jerusalem, Riyadh, and Amman, very important to look at. And I personally think that this blatant and unsuccessful Iranian attack at Israel really is an opportunity to bring about positive change in the Middle East.
How can that happen, Jonathan?
What?
How can that happen?
It can happen if such a diplomatic move is led by the US, and where Israel coordinates its response against this Iranian aggression, works together with Sunni states like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, and we come up with a big plan of how to mitigate Iranian aggression in the Middle East for the better sake of the Saudis, for Jordan, and for the entire Middle East. Basically, wherever the Iranians are trying to destabilize and to wreak havoc, we need to push back. And now, since they've exposed themselves and they've made this tremendous overreach in attacking Israel from Iranian soil, that offers an opportunity to be used cleverly, strategically, under US leadership, but with Israel in a dominant role. And I think that there's an opportunity here for Sunni states that are fearful of Iran and deterred by Iran to join in. And as Yotam said correctly, when push came to shove, Jordan stood up and made a very smart and correct decision. And I hope that the Saudis will do the same. And I think that there are good opportunities down the road for regional stability and prosperity if we take this opportunity to really bring it back to Iran and to curtail their regional aggression.
So perhaps there is some hope in this. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Jonathan Conricius there, who's a senior fellow at the FTD and former spokesman for the IDF. Also Yotam Confino, who is our regular Middle East correspondent. Penny in Essex has been in touch on text. You can do that too, 87222 with the word talk in your text. Penny says, I can't see any of this ending anytime soon. Israel has to defend itself at all costs. I can't stand this constant persecution of Jewish people. I don't think it will ever end though. Amanda says, it is the enemy within that worries me most. We have no idea who's arriving by boat. No need for a Trojan horse these days. And Marty in Belfast says, I think Iran had to respond to the bombing of their embassy, as Jonathan was pointing out, there was a building adjacent to it. But anyway, Martin says, the fact they announced the attack knowing Israel's capabilities, it amounts to a warning shot. Israel should not respond and call it evens. Hopefully that's the end of Iran's direct involvement. I'm sure their proxy war will continue. Marty, I think you make some really good points there. Let us know what you think. 0344 499 1000. You can text as those people did on 87222. WhatsApp us, that same number, 0344 499 1000. Tweet me at talkTV or at Peter Cardwell as well. You can follow me on that one. We're going to talk to our panel next, not just about this, but on domestic issues in the UK as well. Stay with us here on talkTV.